This is Jack Davis calling to order this joint meeting of the RTM Finance and Budget Committee and the RTM Education Committee. I think that we both have a quorum. Liza will be taking charge until Ed Rasheka can join us. And if she wants, she can continue to take charge afterwards.
Thanks, Jack.
Welcome, Liza. I know Ed wouldn't complain. So we're also having the Board of Ed members are signing on now. That's Rich Rudel, and we'll see if it's several of them. They have just completed presenting to the nope, is Alan joining also. They've just finished presenting to the Board of Selectmen. So just for F&B, if there's no objection, I'm going to change the order of the agenda so we can deal with the this first, and then we'll come back. But before that, only because there are two new members. Katie, you're new to education. Do me a favor, just introduce yourself, tell your fellow education people who you are, a little bit of background in that.
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Katie Lebesco. I live on Fairfield Ave in Darien and have just joined the RTM in December and been appointed to the Education Committee in January. So nice to meet you all. Happy to be here. I have one daughter in the high school currently and have lived here for about 11 years.
Hi, Katie.
Hi, Katie. Welcome aboard. And then we have Charlie from F&B who is taking Bert's spot. Unfortunately, Bert had to resign from the RTM. So, Charlie, give a little background.
Yeah, delighted to be here. New to the RTM, new to F&B. I just, as Jack just mentioned, stepping into my friend Bert von Stupenhagel's spot. Sorry he's leaving, but I'm delighted to be joining. I've lived in Darien since 2005. I'm originally a Canadian, born and raised in Toronto, got transferred down to New York in 2005 and have lived on Buttonwood Lane since 2005. So I'm representing District 1. I just retired last year after a almost 40-year career in finance, half in Toronto, half in New York, working in banking for two Canadian banks and Morgan Stanley. So delighted to be here and delighted to be jumping in at what seems to be the busy time of year and a very challenging budgeting process. So looking forward to participating.
Okay, give me 1 second. While I'm doing this, can I ask Liza or Peter or somebody else, what information have you received regarding the transportation initiative? There's been a lot of stuff said today, so I just want to know.
I think the latest thing we got, was an update of the spreadsheet that had, I think it was a 3-year cost projection. It was circulated, right? I think that's the most up-to-date thing we have. And it's 3 years. It's then a short email from John Zagrodsky, kind of just detailing that spreadsheet. There's 2 other attachments, but that's the most recent information that we have.
You're up to date. That's what I want to make sure that everybody had a similar starting point. Okay. So I'm going to give a little background and then we can invite in the folks from the Board of Ed to comment. If you look at this transportation initiative, I like to break it down into three component parts. The first part is we have a P&Z issue because someplace along the line, it has to be determined where the buses are going to be parked. It's two of the Suburbans that were already in the budget. There will be an application to expand the parking at 35 Leroy. That P&Z part is not before us today. And it just needs to be addressed prior to the town taking possession of it, so they can do training. So know that it's there, knowing P&Z will deal with it, knowing Board of Ed will deal with it, but it's not part of what we're doing today. Second part is there's a request for $850,000 to purchase the two Suburbans and 7 other pieces of equipment that were outlined in early February by the Board of Ed. Upon asking the question, I did ask whether or not the other, we outfit all of our buses to have cameras, numbers, all this other stuff. That's included in the price. The price was gotten from, I keep on saying, the consortium, a cooperative, where we actually buy and get a cheaper price. In order to have delivery by the September date and have the lower price, it's important that this special appropriation be approved by the Board of Selectmen, Board of Finance, and RTM at least before the 5th of April, which means we have to do it 10 days earlier. So the other part of it is, what are the actual savings? That will be really evaluated in greater detail during the budget review. The importance of that now is only to determine whether or not there's a return on the investment, and we can go into that. There's been input from Jim Palin, who has joined us, Kate Bush, Jay-Z, even some questions from myself. And Jay-Z reorganized with Rich and Jill the presentation and took a very conservative approach to that and moved forward. So that part we'll be looking at during the budget. Again, only aspect now of it is to determine the return on investment and if there's savings, and in fact, there is. So that's basically where we are. The Board of Selectmen needed to vote on this, which they did earlier tonight, and Jill and Alan can tell what the results of that was. But the Board of Selectmen needed to vote on it because it's a special appropriation and we're using town monies. Board of Finance needs to vote on it, as you can imagine, and the RTM needs to vote on it. The Board of Finance, it's on their agenda for tomorrow night. So with that, I'll hand it over to Rich, Jill, and Alan and see if there's anything else they want to add. And they can tell us what the outcome of the Board of Selectmen meeting was. Unmute. There we go.
Yeah. Thank you all for having us. We appreciate your time, and we appreciate the fact that everybody's had to study quickly on this. We are excited about the opportunity. Given the prospect of dealing with multiple years of high budgets, this makes a real and meaningful difference to our ability to serve students in other ways in the coming years. It isn't a money, given the capital outlay, it isn't necessarily a money saver in the current year, but going forward, it's a savings at a run rate of over $500,000, close to $6. So we're excited about the opportunity. We also feel compelled to say thank you to all those folks that Jack mentioned that have jumped in and helped us problem solve and think through it and bring forward an even more robust fiscal and operational program. Tonight's vote from the selectmen was 5-0 unanimously in favor of this project, given the clear financial implications or savings, I should say. As we started in 2016 with 4 Suburbans, we currently operate 6. So we've been modestly increasing our capacity to deliver this kind of service to all of our students who are eligible for and elect special education transportation, ELP through high school, including our transition population. So with that, I'm happy to open it to questions, Jack, if that's how you all would like to handle it.
I would like to add something else. What this basically is that the town is insourcing or taking in-house all the special ed and ELP transportation. We had started that, I believe, about 6 years ago. 7 years ago, and have had savings, and that has moved forward as we have expanded the number of Suburbans that we are currently operating. So with that, we will open it up. One question I did have that maybe you can answer. Can you just give a high-level approach from the Board of Ed and the administration? Because there's some things that we outsource, cafeteria workers, some custodial work, but there's other things we try and bring in-house. So can you give an overview of how you view that from a philosophical perspective?
I'm going to pass it to Rich.
Oh, Rich is there. Yeah.
Sure. So one, it obviously has to make sense for the students, whether or not we're going to insource or outsource. And then obviously it depends on a financial cost. I mean, one of the things that started us to look at this is when we did issue the RFP for transportation, there was quite a bit of sticker shock in terms of what the results were. Darien has historically not really had many bidders interested in serving Darien because parking the buses is a challenge in Darien. There's 4 or 5 main players in transportation, and really only one has ever been interested in serving Darien. And so there's not a big market. It allows for a lot of upward pressure in the financial costs. In terms of insourcing, we have looked at insourcing a lot of special education items over the year. Whether it's transportation, paras and RBTs, while not a special education program, Fitch has served a lot of needs. So we really do try to balance whether it's A, good for students, and 2, whether it makes financial sense.
Thank you. So we'll take I guess to further some conversation, I'm going to read the resolution that will be before the RTM next Monday. This is basically hot off the presses. And it goes, whereas the town of Darien Board of Education has the desire to improve its special education transportation by supplementing its special education transportation vehicles it is currently utilizing, and whereas the appropriation has been reviewed by the Board of Education at its meeting on February 13th, 2024 meeting, and whereas the appropriation will go before the Board of Selectmen at its meeting on November 11th, 2024, and whereas this request will go before the Board of Finance at its March 2024 meeting, and then to the representative town meeting at its March 18th, 2024 meeting. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the RTM hereby approves and authorizes the appropriation in the amount of $850,000 for the improvements to the town of Darien special education transportation. Now that I read that, I'm first going to go to F&B. Can I have somebody move that from F&B by raising? I have Beth. I have Bill as a second. All right. I need somebody from education.
Our meeting 15th.
What?
You have February 13th as our meeting, so just in case.
I honestly didn't have anything, but the attorney did.
We had to reschedule because of snow.
That's right. Fair enough. Um, let me write it down and I'll get that back to Wayne. So much easier when the kids were here. I had crayons all over. Okay. All right. Do I have somebody from education moving this? I
Do you
have
guys want to
Clara
vote?
moving. Go ahead, Liza.
I just didn't know if you guys wanted to vote first and then I suppose vote second.
No, we're
or
going to have
one
it. I
to-
just wanted to move it, then we can have the discussion. Just a
Great, okay.
formality. So
Great.
I have for you, I have Clara. I need a second. Where are you, Jan? We have Katie seconding, Lebesco for that. So we're ready to go. Now, are there any questions for the trio that's sitting someplace at town hall, I'm assuming? Okay, I have Jenny.
Hi, I just wanted to ask maybe Rich, Dr. Adley and Jill on the analysis that we got earlier today. There's an assumption that under this arrangement, new employees, everyone's going to be assuming to take health insurance. And just to be clear, I understand that. And so I know our current situation is not all drivers take health insurance. So is it, safe to assume that if nobody takes all the insurance, if not everybody takes insurance, there's potentially more savings, which means we could get our return on capital a little faster?
So the selectmen requested that we show this in the most conservative manner possible, and so that included everybody taking insurance. If we look at the 6 drivers we have now, only one actually elects to take health insurance. And so typically when we budget for employees, we look at what data points we have and to make an assumption about things like health insurance. And so something similar we did with the SSOs. We actually budgeted no health insurance, making the assumption that most retired police officers get health insurance, and that ended up playing out. So it's likely that when we play this out and the individuals are hired, it will be very unlikely, I would say, that all 9 would take health insurance.
But we're going to continue to be conservative, which is we have had a rider in there for increased cost of insurance, gasoline, that everybody's taking health insurance, and eventually we'll have, if in fact there's a rental of a space to park the vehicles, the other 7 vehicles, that will be added as well. So I just want to say, we're not changing this to say there's greater savings. We're keeping it to say we're going to be conservative on this. So sorry to shut that down, but go ahead, Clara.
Okay, on the original proposal that I think we got over the weekend, the date on it is February 1st. There's an entry for a transportation assistant and then a transportation director salary adjustment. So I guess I'm just wondering, do we already have these positions and they're going to be increased in the number of hours the person works, or are they people that we are going to hire outright?
We have one person who currently is in place, and then we would have an assistant we brought on to provide just real-time assistance for the special education transportation that we're bringing on board. So we'll need both of those people. And given the extra responsibilities that would take place, there is a salary adjustment for the current, I'll call them bus manager that we have right now.
Okay, so both of these people are on the staff now.
No, one is.
Just
No,
one
the
is.
assistant needs to be hired.
Okay. Okay, I guess I'm just wondering about, I think that Rich Rudel said at the beginning, when he was talking about this, it's kind of like the district having its own bus company. And I guess I wondered what the personnel implications would be going forward. I see what you have here, but do you anticipate needing more help with the district having its own bus company?
So the only real help we would need is that assistant. We would want that assistant to have what's considered a V endorsement, so that assistant could be a transportation driver as well, so that they could act as a substitute. It also would allow us to have an individual who has a lot of school bus experience and school transportation experience.
Okay, and are these in addition, do you have a person who works in central office who coordinates the bus schedule for general education? I mean, is there somebody who does that?
We have one person in central office who does that.
So
We would
that's
also then assume this on top of that.
I see. Okay, just wanted to know. Thank you.
Next question, Peter.
Yeah, so I think this is financially obviously attractive. I just have a couple of questions regarding the purchase itself, but really the risk here is the confidence around the execution, right? So we deliver the services in timely and acceptable manner. So regarding that financial part, the purchase itself, the 850,000, I saw the list of vendors. Was it the lowest bid, or were there other considerations given we have, sort of, short timeline? And secondly, are there, in case they do not deliver these vehicles in time, are there any financial remedies and penalties they would we can charge them?
Sure. So it was the lowest bid, and it was somebody who's on the cooperative state purchasing agreement. The other benefit of them is they are also the vendor that has the biggest kind of fleet of available vehicles. So until we actually get an appropriation and can iron out a contract and issue a purchase order, we can't really determine whether or not there would be any penalties for not delivering in time. Our expectation, and we've had really weekly communication with the vendor since we've really started to discuss this, is that they feel if given a purchase order in the time frame we've laid out, that they can deliver on time at the start of the August.
Great. And this purchase, the 850,000, it seems like the resolution we're asking for is a part of a regular budget, or is this a capital? Is it a capital?
This is a separate appropriation. So it is not the expense side that Claire was just inquiring about. That will be part of the regular budget. But this is a special appropriation so that they're authorized to make the purchase. If we're the last ones to vote, they'd be authorized to make the purchase as of March 28th or 29th, which meets the April 15th timeline. This is coming out of general fund funds.
General fund, got it. Understood. Yeah. So regarding the operations itself, right? I know we have 6 Suburbans, but we never operated the Type 2 vehicles, right? So how confident are we that we know what we're doing? I know the parking, we're not deciding on parking, but it's a part of an issue clearly, right? And really the question is, in case one of them or two of them breaks, have we identified the maintenance shop that would help us with it?
Sure. So we are confident that we could staff them and operate them. If planning and zoning comes through and we can park at the Fitch spot that's located, it is an ideal spot for these vehicles. So there would be no issues going in and out. In terms of the maintenance on the vehicles, obviously we'd have to do oil changes and brake inspections and things like that. That can all be done at the DPW garage.
Okay.
If there is anything that's more extensive as the vehicles age, we do have a relationship with some other vendors that we can send these out to. Typically, if you have a vehicle that's offline and it's usually like a day or so, in a pinch, we could collapse routes if we had to. It does lengthen the ridership that the students are on the bus, so it's not ideal. But there are options available to us should we have some type of vehicle breakdown.
Right. I just want one sort of number detail here is, we're going to do the summer school with the current vendor, right? Because there's just not enough time, and we're budgeting 230,000. Oh yeah, but if we're not using this vendor going forward, is the contract for regular transportation set, or are they, is there some kind of negative implication from cutting them off from this special ed?
Sure.
Well, before you start, Rich, let me just remind everyone, we are currently in negotiations with the vendor, and that was part of what was going on. And maybe, Rich, you were going to say that.
I see.
I just wanted to remind everyone. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Rich.
Okay. Yeah.
So as Jack mentioned, we are currently in negotiations with the current vendor. We did have that RFP that it was mentioned that was issued, and then so our attorneys are working with First Students attorneys. ESY does start prior to the execution of that contract. It does start the last week of June. So they would be obligated to continue. One of the reasons why we're looking at the timing as being so critical is we don't really want to have to terminate this section of the contract mid-contract. And while we have the right under the contract to sever ties with 60 days notice, it does create potential operational issues. So one of the things in the contract is we have to maintain an average age of the fleet. And so typically once that contract is executed, they would begin purchasing new vehicles. And from there, and they would be amortizing the cost of the vehicles over the life of the contract. They would be out that, obviously, that investment because we don't have another vendor in hand to take over, let's say, the home to school routes. We don't want to be in a position where we're scrambling to staff the home to school routes, and we want to maintain that relationship with First Student. We don't have to look very far to other communities who've had very difficult relationships with bus vendors. I mean, Westport recently made a switch, and they're having issues as to where to park their vehicles all over town. Newtown has had issues where they have not been able to secure drivers because of some switches that were made, and they've had to send blasts out to parents saying, "I'm sorry, there's going to be no buses for your children today." Same with New Milford as an example. And so we want to make sure that we have a good working relationship with First Student because the home to school transportation is still going to exist and we're still going to need to rely on them.
Sure.
The other thing that I just want to give a little bit of background for those that are new, we have only one bid coming in from a bus company for the town of Darien, and that is First Student. And that is because we have no place to park our buses. And I believe John Cini mentioned during one of the Board of Ed meetings that over a 3-year period, if we did have a place that they could have a dispatcher and a mechanic and other things like that, it would save the town an additional $600,000. Not that it was doing it, but that was the number that was thrown out there. So we do not want to get into a bad relationship with our only bus company. Is that a nice way of putting it, Rich?
Yes, very much so.
Yeah, First Student didn't miss a day for us during COVID. Didn't have drivers who missed, got our kids all to school. So there's a very strong relationship there that we would like to keep intact as much as we can.
And just out of curiosity, could you remind me why, given the excellent relationship with First Student, that they're not in a position to satisfy the requirements of this particular set of individuals?
They are able to satisfy the requirements, and they have done. It's just that it is increasingly expensive, and we can do it for cheaper. And we also can then provide a nice level of service, great long-term relationships that we have control over. This is a financial decision.
Yeah, because like, I mean, you know, there's a reason why in the past 25 years that a wave of outsourcing has spread through, you know, Western economies, right? And that is because even though you do have to pay a third-party vendor a profit margin, so obviously First Student is getting a profit margin on anything we pay them, and if we insource it, then obviously we don't have to pay a profit margin to ourselves. But you know, the reason is that then that you end up with fixed costs that don't go away. You know, you end up, if anything, you know, there's a reason why car companies don't own their own steel plants anymore and their own tire factories and so on. So if what you guys are saying is that there's an economic benefit, which is further complicated by the fact that we don't have like a proper private market in operation in Southern Connecticut, then I guess that leaves us at the point where we really don't have another choice. But you know, purely on an economic basis, you know, outsourcing will always be more expensive than insourcing. I mean, that's economic fact. But there are lots of other reasons why it doesn't make sense to become a permanent insourcer of anything we can think of. I mean, from my point of view, you know, when we get into you know, having an in-house bus company and we have a transportation director and then we got an assistant transportation director who's then got career aspirations and. I mean, this becomes this very quickly becomes a slippery slope if we're not careful.
I mean, it does, except that we're only going as far as big as our district. And at this stage, you know, we've started again with 6 Suburbans. This is, you know, basically taking up the rest of the special education. I think it's a modest expansion. We could have looked at the entire fleet, but that is a very different level of operations in terms of managing large 72 passenger buses, what that would take from mechanics. And as Rich explained some of this earlier, mechanics, location to park them, places to serve them, a place for everybody to come and meet and, park their cars at the end of the day while their buses are out. So we're considering this to be, we're really running a hybrid model, which this is what we think is the most efficient and effective.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions? Are both committees ready to vote? If so, I do believe, Ed, you're now on. Are you there, Ed?
Yeah, I'm on, but I'm driving. So I'm gonna, if you or if someone else from my committee would not mind sort of counting the noses, because I definitely can't look at the screen.
Fine. We put Liza in charge anyway, so we'll just keep Liza in charge. Liza, can you do a vote? And if you need help, we can help you for that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. For the Education Committee, for those in favor of this appropriation, can you please, if you can turn your camera on and either raise your hand or say aye, that would be helpful. Okay, I see.
Aye.
Do you want me to go through the people that I see?
Yeah, that would be great, actually.
Okay, I see.
Ed says aye.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, we don't see Ed, but I see Peter, Clara, Curtis, Jan, Cassie, Janet. Got to keep on going to the next page. Oop, back to the first. Karen.
Yeah. And Katie is.
Okay, so then.
Katie. Yep. Okay, that's it.
No,
That's
we
unanimous.
also have somebody who hasn't voted yet.
Me.
Do we have?
It's just me.
Do we have any no votes? Do we have? I see none for you. Do we have any abstentions? Okay, you're good.
Yeah, that was unanimous.
So that
Okay,
was 9?
super.
I think we're 10. 10.
10, okay.
All right. For F&B, everybody turn on your screen so I can see. All those in favor, please raise your hand. I see Jack, Charlie, Bill, Jenny, Charles, Beth, Louisa, keep on going down the road, Malin, Peter, Holly. Let's see if anybody snuck to the other page. Bill Smith snuck to the other page. So I think that's everyone. Thank you to the Board of Ed very much for taking your time.
Thank you.
And we're going to let you go. And Bill, you have 22 minutes.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Jack. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you. So
Thank you.
F&B is going to continue on its meeting. You guys, before you all go, wait. You need to do a motion to adjourn. So for everybody who's still here for education, please raise your hand if you want to adjourn. Move it.
Aye.
I have Jan moving. I have Karen seconding. It looks unanimous. Thank you. Now you guys can adjourn.
Thank you, Jack.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Jack.
Thanks, everybody.
Okay. Thank you all for your patience and sharing. I'm going to go through some other things. One of the items on our list, I may be a little out of order because I lost the agenda, but that's it. We need somebody to move the approval of the Great Island lease on 20 Great Island Road. So I need somebody to move that. Do I have somebody moving it? I have Louisa moving it. I have Bill Dunn seconding it. I was going to say this is the same lease as the last leases, but it's not. Apparently, they found two fireplaces in the location that the person is moving to. So there's a rider saying you can't use either of the fireplaces. This is the other apartment tenant who's moving from their apartment into there's with two units basically adjacent to the main manor house. And one was rented, one was not. And this is that person moving in there for the same rent they were getting before. Any questions on that? Seeing none, we're ready to vote. All in favor, raise your hand. Fine, it's unanimous. That takes care of it. Next. There is I need a motion to approve a special appropriation for 26,500 to do some initial applications for dredging in the canal, and also some preliminary testing to find out what the sediment is, whether or not it's clean or not. My understanding is it might take as long as 2 to 3 years to get the approval from the Connecticut EPA in order to do the dredging. I will say Jim Palin did yeoman's work by trying to see if we couldn't do some other way of paying for this as opposed to a special appropriation. But the desire is that it's a special appropriation. So the Board of Selectmen and the Board of Finance has already approved that. So I need somebody to move it. I have Jenny moving. I have Charlie seconding. Okay. Any questions? Seeing none, are we ready to vote? Well, this is moving along fine. All right, all in favor, raise your hand. Again, it's unanimous. All right. So, next, let's talk about the budget. I just want to make sure there's a couple of meetings that I've sent out to let you know that the PZNH met with Jeremy Ginsburg on the P&Z and Building Committee. Budgets, as always, listening to Jeremy is an education in and of itself of what's going on. The committee already approved the budget from their perspective, including there's one capital item for 50,000. We do the town plan of conservation and development, and it's a 3-year process to get it done. So the cost of that is split over the next 3 years. It's one of those non-recurring expenses. And so they're going to have to go to a new person because the individual that they've been using in the past wants to retire before the 3 years are up, which seemed to have Amy and Jeremy, not as happy as what it is because that gentleman did a very good job, but they will find somebody else. So that's what we need is Louisa, and I think Nick is the other one on there with myself. We need to contact the Board of Finance folks and just have a brief conversation on what's going on there. Charles and Peter, I believe, you're on Public Works. I sent out the conversation that Public Works had with Ed Gentile. That there's 3 other people working on that. Please just organize that with the Board of Finance. Let's see. Public Works is Rob Cadone and Dave Martin. And, contact them, sit down, set up a meeting, do a Zoom, go out for coffee, whatever, to discuss that. And we should be doing the same. I know that Taylor's reached out on a number of projects. So, and I saw that Holly responded. Louisa, you've responded to Kara on the library. So just start reaching out to the corresponding people on Board of Finance. I don't want to put Jim on the spot, but hopefully tomorrow they'll be discussing the time frame of when each of these subject matters will be discussed at the Board of Finance. And we should be actually meeting and getting our opinions, joint opinions, to the Board of Finance prior to that meeting. So if there is any concern, people know. Yes, Jim.
Charlie's late to the party. So just to recap, Charlie,
I'll
sort
give you
of-
a call, Charlie, and tell
Yeah.
you what it. We'll go out for coffee.
Yeah.
And I know you've been catching up on things from our last email, so we can go to coffee, and I'll give you where we are in some of the documents.
That'd be great.
I have to assign you someplace, so I will. But let me first talk about what interests you, and then we can figure it out from there. Is there anything anybody wants to report based upon what they've been looking at already? I know, Peter, you've been looking at some of the items. Everybody's quiet.
I reached out to the counterparts for the Parks and Rec and the community environment, and I was just waiting for the Board of Finance to have their meeting and then follow up with those counterparts after tonight's meeting to give them a little breathing room. But we'll have those meetings set up soon.
Yeah, don't give them time. Just bug them.
I'll
They're
call them
used
tomorrow.
to it.
I was going to call them tomorrow.
Yeah.
But they know. They said, I talked to Dan and he said, we
Yeah.
just let's just get through this next meeting and then we'll set something up. And then right now there's nothing glaring that's staring at me at the moment.
So yeah,
Jack,
ahead.
quickly, when John Zagrodzky presented the Board of Selectmen budget, he said that he didn't use the word transformative, but he said basically this is the cost of doing business. And if you wanted to really, if you wanted to make a substantial difference, lowering this budget, that you would have to decide what services we didn't want to provide anymore. And I actually think that was a pretty good summary. And I think that's why everyone's quiet. There's not much new in these budgets. There's just some challenges that have happened with contracts and inflation and some bad luck where things have come due. And it's nothing that we haven't been facing or looking at over the past several years. It's just a higher number this year. I think the subject is what's going to happen moving forward, right? When you have more and more debt service.
So I think that's what we talked about a lot. Let me first just answer something I wanted to say to Jenny. It's not the first time to this rodeo for members of the Board of Finance. So reach out to them. They all know the shtick of what needs to be done here. So, they're all experienced with that. So don't be afraid to push them a little bit. But getting it done, it's better that we're all meeting prior to their having those conversations. As Melinda, I think that it's something that we even discussed last week, or our last meeting. And I've been trying to get some better numbers associated with it so that maybe at the next time we're meeting, I can present it. But if I look at the increases in the operating budgets for the town and the Board of Ed without their capital, trying to get to that memo. Over the last 3 years for fiscal 22, our mill rate increase was 3.1, and 23, 2.3, and in 24, 2.2. But the Board of Ed budget in 24 was up 3.47%. The operating budget sans without capital and net revenue was up 3.55. overall, including debt and library, the Board of Selectmen, without looking at capital or revenue, was up 8.45%, and that total block of debt and that. And yet the mill rate went up 2.2%. And so certain things have been masking what it really costs to run this town. And, an analogy that's was said to me, but I'm stealing, is that for all of us that remember Popeye, or at least are old enough to remember Popeye, there was a character by the name of Wimpy who said, I'll gladly pay you Tuesday for a hamburger today. Well, we've been buying a lot of hamburgers, and it's starting to be time to pay up. And it's very unfortunate that this is on a reval year where people's taxes will be going up based upon where they stand in the 29%. But we have that. If John did an excellent job presenting, but how much is going to be there if you look at the drawdowns on the general fund? That was one of the questions John asked. Somebody asked John how much we were anticipating to be contributed back. If you look at the general fund, currently had 30.8 million. The analysis that John did showed 33.8 million, which was anticipating $3 million coming back to the general fund from 24 operations and revenue, mostly on the revenue side. That did include about 360 to satisfy the debt, the ongoing deficit from the Board of Ed, which is now down to about 240. When you start looking at what's there, and John allocated 2.6 million out of the remaining 3 million to go there. But, if you start looking down the road, we have 850,000 for the buses that are going to be going. We potentially have $1 million on a security system for the Board of Ed that hasn't really been put forward. That's not in the budget. We have 650,000 while we're waiting for the final project on the Weed Beach initiative. We have high six figures that will come out of the general fund for a special appropriation, probably in June, for the master plan on Great Island, based upon a conversation I had with Monica. We have $26,500. I'm sorry, I mentioned. But there's some other things that are also coming down the road. And so, some of that money we have to keep in the bank because it might be necessary. So yes, it would not be unreasonable to see a 5% increase in this year's budget. Not what any of us want, but it's a much better representation of what it truly costs to run the town. That doesn't mean that there can't be adjustments on the Board of Ed side. I think many of us believe there can be. And hopefully we can work with the Board of Finance to come to an agreed amount for what they need to do. So I think that pretty much summarizes it. Is there any other comments or?
Hey, Jack, it's Peter Mahopoulos. I had the opportunity to review some of the budgets, and Melinda and I got on a call the other day as well. With respect to the police budget, I saw that we did hire another patrol officer to the budget. With all the new, and I think that brings the count to 52. Couple of questions here. The first one is, with all the new developments going on that are up, particularly in Corbin and Commons, can we, I guess, get more patrol officers up and down Boston Road just for more security? There's a lot more people there. And secondly, the overtime budget seems pretty high. And I know it's itemized amongst different things, but the patrol overtime seems a little high. Is there any plans on perhaps hiring more police on a full-time basis versus paying overtime, especially when the Palmer project is up and federal realty is up, et cetera? Because, to me, police is very important, but we also have to kind of, manage overtime and what this overtime is all about. But just want to maybe get your thoughts on that.
Well, first, as a citizen, you can speak to the new police chief that will be installed, I believe, April 1st, and discuss the patrol aspects. But for our committee, that's a little bit too much in the weeds, and we
Sure.
sort of stay out of their operations. But
Okay.
definitely you can mention it. An interesting thing, because a number of years ago, I also questioned the overtime. Apparently, the police need to have training, and the way that they get trained, they have an exorbitant amount of training that's required by the state. And the way they get training is they come in on their day off, and that constitutes overtime. So most of the training, unfortunately, is done on overtime. Just so that's part of how much of it is a good question to ask Chief Anderson. I think he has a handle on it, but if not, Captain Marone, who's going to be our new chief, will have a handle on what those numbers are.
Yeah, it is itemized in the budget in terms of the overtime. I'm looking at it right now, and for some reason the numbers aren't showing up. But the majority of the overtime is for patrol overtime, and I do see what you're saying with respect to, firearms training and things like that. But a lot of it, the majority of the overtime is due to patrol overtime. And I guess one of the questions was, are we better served just hiring another full-time employee versus paying overtime, and are we really monitoring the overtime? Is because these guys, they punch in and out, but
well, I remember, and we talked about this, and we can talk about it again when we have our meeting with public safety. But if my memory serves me right, the union contract allows them to not have to work on holidays. So every holiday is overtime. You can't hire somebody because they're going to be subject to that contract, in other words. So you have to staff on your holidays. So I'm pretty sure that that's all overtime. So
well, you also have the vacancies tend to be mostly on patrol, which is part of the reason. And part of the reason we got a lot of money back from the town side was because we had vacancies in the police force, not all of it, but a good part of it. And so if they weren't, this is the first year that they're probably fully staffed and hired for as long as I can remember. So for that, they were doing overtime. Also, and I can't remember the event, it may be the 4th of July, but on the 4th of July, every officer's in. I mean,
it's Memorial Day as well.
That's what it is. Yeah. It was one of them.
Memorial Day.
Yeah. That everybody's there. So, there's certain things that it's listed as patrol overtime, but that's because it's being paid to the patrol officers. But it's worthwhile to have the conversation, how much of it is due to what from that. But I do know that Chief Anderson, from working with him all these years, he treats the police budget as if he's paying the taxes himself. I mean, that's always been his philosophy on this.
Yeah, and by the way, I'd love to see more police out on the street, especially in the Corbin area where there's a lot more traffic. I think they, having more of a presence is always a good thing versus less of a presence.
Right. So that's worthwhile to have a conversation with your counterparts, with the Board of Finance, and then take it from there. Rob Cordone, who I believe is one of your counterparts on the police. The two of them have been doing this for quite a while. Rob used to be on this committee, and that was part of his responsibility, was the police also. So it's good to just reach out to them and have that conversation. So give Rob a call.
Sure.
Anything else?
Jack, yeah, Jack, what would interest me is, and I don't know, I tried to do this a little bit on my own, playing around with the open government platform, but I'm not a power user. But I mean, to my mind, I feel that I mean, a little bit. I have a bit of a philosophical problem with the approach that we're taking. We have dedicated, highly smart individuals running the police department. They're under intense scrutiny from both the Board of Selectmen as well as people from the Board of Finance that understand this exactly. And so then we're supposed to, I mean, using Peter as an example, one of us is supposed to be calling up and discussing for the 34th time, whether it should be 51 or 52 people, and whether the amount of overhead or overtime is X versus Y hours. I think we should be having a much more basic conversation, and that is, how many police officers do we need for the number of the X thousand people that we have living in this town? Is it comparable to what towns of a similar security and exposure level? Like, do we have on a per capita basis, similar number of people to, I don't know, Westport or New Canaan or whoever our quote unquote similar towns would be? And are we sort of resourcing things at the appropriate level? And if it turns out that you see what I'm saying, right? So, I mean, otherwise we're just
right
having
with you,
discussions
Charles.
about minutia on top of minutia about how many extra bullets are going to be in the safe, and why we need so many unused rounds. I mean, you know what I'm saying, right? So let's just get some benchmarks on the table so we could inform a top-down conversation about whether we, on behalf of the town, of the citizens of this town, condone an 8% per annum budget increase. You're not going to crack that by dealing in the minutia of sub-budget by sub-budget, in my opinion.
I agree with you, Charles. And quite honestly, even when I was doing something on the bus and I was asking some detail on that, I actually apologized to the Board of Ed, but I just wanted to make sure that certain things were accounted for.
Of course.
But other than that, it's their job to make sure it is. So the answer is yes, fine, I'm good. I'm not questioning what they're putting on the bus. That's their job. The same thing is that they're going to be adding a half a person. A lot of it has to do with FOIA. I think the case was made for it at it. The other thing that I like to remind people of is that in order to move the needle 1 basis points, forget 100, 1 basis point, we need to have someplace between $75,000 to $110,000. And so whether or not they're adding another person or not, they made the case. I don't think that's going to turn it in this budget one way or another. I agree with what Malin said. Presentation was pretty good. We can decide what it is. There's a couple of items on revenue that the Board of Finance can potentially look at. They can consider if they want to further reduce the Board of Finance contingency, as that we moved down to 175,000 and they only spent 26, with the knowledge that the RTM will always reimburse them and restock the fund if necessary. So there's not a lot to really discuss on the Board of Selectmen side. It was well presented. And some of these costs that are driving it are what they are. I hate to say it. Healthcare is up. It's there. Debt is up.
But so therefore, the primary conversation has to be around service levels.
Right.
What John Zagroski said, what Malin reiterated.
Mm-hmm.
We have 20,000 people living in this town. We have 52 going up to 53 police officers. Is that the right number of people for this town, given where we are?
Yep.
That's the conversation we should have.
And after that, once you have it this year, since it's going to be the same and the population may increase somewhat, it's going to be the same for the next couple of years, to be honest with you. So unless there's a significant change someplace along the line, that's where a lot of it is. The question that we're going to have this year is going to be on where the Board of Ed is, because there are some concerns there based upon what was put on the table by the superintendent versus what the Board of Ed actually approved, and what they perceive their financial responsibility is. But that can be handled. And then the next thing is debt. How much debt? But the fact of the matter is that other than the fire engine, I don't think this committee or several other people I've spoken to want to have any new debt coming up. We have enough, and we have some cash to pay. And when it comes to some of these projects, we have a couple of things. We can either look for more ARPA money, we can pay for it with return cash, we can or we can tax our taxpayers for the capital this year instead of bonding it like we've been doing in the past. Or we can actually say, no, we don't like this project, not this year. So those are the things that I think are going to be what we're really going to have to deal with. And then also figure out that, as I was saying, if it's costing, from John's analysis initially, 7% increase to run the town, and even with some contributions, you're at 5.5%. Well, that's what it is, guys. And we should be, as elected officials, willing to explain that this is reasonable, and this is what it is. So, and by the way, I don't like paying more taxes. So, but it is reasonable. We got to move it forward. So, I think that's what you're saying, Charles.
Let me ask you another question, Jack.
Sure.
The education budget of 121 million bucks is currently proposed, equates to $26,500 per student.
Yep.
What I'd like to know is what's the equivalent number for Greenwich, for New Canaan, for Wilton, for Westport, for Scarsdale, New York. Give me 10 towns within a 20-mile radius, and I'd like to see what the cost per student is for those 8 similar towns. And then I think we should have that discussion. And then once we have those numbers, then we can say maybe we're getting a great deal, or you know what I'm saying, right? We can then talk about why there are differences and what are they due to different service levels, different economies, what have you. I'd like to see those stats.
Yeah, I can give them to you, but there used to be something called the CETA report. Melinda, go ahead. You have experience.
Well, I was just going to say we've historically been one of the lowest in our DERG, which doesn't include all of what you just said, but we've almost always been a very good deal. Like under Wilton, under Greenwich, under New Canaan, under Westport.
Okay, but then why doesn't the Board of Ed show us those stats?
They do.
Okay, I've not seen them.
The slide they had in the presentation on March 5th was what percentage change each of those towns had.
And by the way, we were the second
but they
highest.
had it in their other.
We were the second highest growth rate in that chart.
Yeah, but they also had what it is within the DERG. Now,
okay.
I will say, comparing DERGs and those numbers are comparing apples to oranges, and here's the reason why. Okay, depending upon how many elementary schools you have, like we have 5. We're going to have more administrators than a school district that only has 3.
Fair enough. That's an explanation.
And those are all those things that, plus we'll have more building expense and other things like that. I think it's Weston that has all 3 of their school buildings on one campus. So, yeah, right. They're much lower than us.
Good for them, yeah. But anyway.
So then when you try and compare it, it's funny that what we call an assistant principal, they call something else. So even when you're trying to compare the administration of the schools, it's like, okay, they call things different, so it's hard to imagine.
Okay.
And while we are at times the lowest, we've also been growing. So we haven't been the lowest for a while. We're like in the middle. But it also matters what term the union contract is. So if we're ahead of somebody else, then we're going to be higher based upon that. The fact of the matter is that my biggest concern, and I know expressed by others, you hired your professionals to set up, this is how you wanted to structure the schools. And I'm not going to get into whether or not Alan did a good job presenting it one way or another. Not my vote, doesn't count. But the fact of the matter is that everything that was supposed to be reduced to compensate for certain other things were voted back in. In addition, just as an example, they initially put, and it's a small number, but 150,000 operating expenses was put out to capital. And when rumor had it that if it stayed there, I was going to cut it on the floor of the RTM, it all of a sudden went back into operations. So, and by the way, I would have. The fact of the matter is, they're ordering 2/3 of the desks this year. So, wait a second. If you're having a tough year because you have drivers, this isn't the year to order all those desks. Yeah. And I can go chapter and verse through that budget and give you one after another that they hadn't considered. When you have a tough year like this, maybe this isn't the year you replace uniforms. Everybody gets pushed out a year. There's all things that you and I would do in business that just didn't matter to the board. And that's why I have less problem saying, this is a little humpy. And I understand the drivers. Transportation was one, healthcare is another, union contracts another. You're not getting the turnover in teachers that we used to get, where somebody would leave and we'd hire somebody less expensive. We have significant increased costs in special ed. Some of it's COVID related, some of it is outplacement related. All of those are part of our core business in education. And that's totally acceptable for them to have those things. So when you have those drivers as your core, then you got to look elsewhere to say, can I really run business as usual? And their answer is yes. And that's why they're at 6.5% instead of some amount lower. Could they have gotten to 3% this year? I'm not allowed to curse here, but not likely.
Right.
All right. Could they have gotten to 4%? I'm not even sure they could have done that this year. If I look at the drivers and what their core business are, I don't think they should have been there either. But someplace between 5 and 6 might have been reasonable, and you might have had some suffering. But my goal is always to make changes. And by the way, remember that they took out some money last year. My goal is always to make changes that are not affecting the basic education of our students. So if I'm moving uniforms out, other than the hygienic, that's not affecting education. If I'm not replacing computers, which they have in the past, where if you go into teachers, they have unopened laptops in their desk that they haven't used, but we still are replacing them. That's something that should be considered that we can defer. The desk, there's other things you can start going through and saying, guys, really take a look. And I don't have the confidence that the board did. And I know there was some disappointment by some board members. And as somebody wrote to me, doing a budget is not an exercise in public opinion. Doing a budget is a science and it's an art. And it's really making tough decisions when you have to. And so that's just for all of us who have done budgets over our lifetime. it's always easy when things are going well. It's tough when it's not. And this is one of the things where they had a lot of drivers. I think that if they got even to 5%, that would have been a lucky budget for them this year. I don't know, Malin, you participated and looked at it. Beth, do you agree with me that based upon the drivers they had, that they were not going to get to a 3 or 4%?
I think it would have been lucky to get to 5.5.
Yeah, I agree. I agree.
I agree
with that too.
But I think the frustration is just that what the core business is, I mean, it seems pretty obvious that would be educating students, but we know that it's a little more complicated than that, because I think you would say, oh, is security part of the core business, right? Like, is mental health part of the core business? Like, what is part of the core business? Are the clubs and councils, is sports part of the club business? So I really wish that conversation had been had a little more. At a very high level, because I agree, I'm not I'm not in the weeds on this stuff, and I don't have the right degree to know what they could have done. I mean, I can see it on the fringes too. Like, you could have easily, I mean, we added to our sports budget in this budget. We added more coaches. And I mean, just one little example. If you just asked the coaches to cap the number of athletes they have on a team, you wouldn't have had to add coaches. I'm stunned by it, so, but it wouldn't save that much money. So it's not worth ranting about, really, but they just haven't really explained where their priorities are.
Well, they have, it's everything. And then if you listen to
everything's core. Yeah. Like adding
and
more coaches is core business. I mean,
that's right. Now, of all those things that you mentioned, now my kids are out of school, so I might look at things different. The only thing that I think is core out of the things you mentioned is the social emotional well-being of students at any time. I would argue that their concern about having their assistant principal spending more and more time in PPTs. I actually wanted to have a meeting, but I was told I can't, because I tend to believe that because of the work that we've been doing in social emotional, a lot of the additional PPTs, which are greater than our peer areas, happen to be when a child is in crisis at a social emotional period.
Yeah. So by the way, you don't have to have APs in all your PPTs. So
no.
like think out of the box. Like, that's what I mean. I don't understand. I'm willing to support a big school budget, because I think that actually ends up helping Darien. So I'm pretty bullish on that, but I'm not bullish on not explaining why there's no trade-offs on these margin kind of things, and thinking out of the box on some of this stuff. And I don't understand why we're not looking at how we have PPTs and who's in those and what's really required.
But I'm going to go a step back. So I can't think of anything more important than an assistant principal meeting with a student and their parents when a child is in need. I can't think of anything more important than that. That's more important than walking the halls. That's more important than going into a teacher and seeing how they're teaching. That is a life-changing job. So when I look at what's going on, sometimes you just have to realize that what you have as your definition for what an assistant principal should be doing is wrong. And it has to be changed. And you don't fix it by throwing another body there to handle more PPTs. It says, do I need them in every one of these committee meetings? I have team leads who are supposed to be working with all the teachers in the Middlesex and the high school on how you're teaching the curriculum, what is the assistant principal doing in there on a subject matter that they don't know? So I don't understand that duplication. I don't understand some of the other things they're getting in. It's nice that they're seen and walking the halls, but I think that from my own anecdotal experience, having 4 kids and their friends, they relate to a teacher, they relate to a coach, they may relate to a guidance counselor, they may relate to a special ed paraprofessional. Very few kids are walking over here saying, my mentor is an assistant principal. I mean, there's so many other roles in there that are fulfilling student needs. And, it could be the resource officer there, which some kids are there. So it could be a gym teacher or just any other teacher there. So I think that the problem is they haven't taken a look and really evaluated what those assistant principals are spending their time on, what they think they should spend the time on, and between the two, what really you're asking them to spend time on that you really don't need them to do. I mean, I've had to do that when we change staff or directions in a corporation. And this isn't much different. And sometimes you're going to need to do PPTs because that's what's being demanded of your current student body. And that's okay.
Well, I think the
Go.
same is true of many areas of the budget. It's that nothing is reimagined. So, you have the way you've always done all of your teams or all of your clubs or all of your classes. And so you just continue that and add, as you get more students or whatever. So, I mean, I just think when you're at this type of a budget increase, that would have been, they should do by the way, they should do this work during the year. All the updates to the Board of Ed are always like, oh, special ed is fine, or, oh, here's our wonderful preschool program. It's fine. They never say like, we would like to add a day. They wait until the budget cycle and then there's no time to do this work that you're talking about. You don't have time to reimagine what your AP should be doing.
Yeah, you don't hear
For
too
example.
often, Houston, we have a problem.
No. I watch a
That's-
lot of the board meetings and they're all just kind of vanilla. There's no, I don't know. Hard to explain. Maybe Beth.
They're
can.
all sort of like swimming along as usual until it gets to budget season. And then suddenly it's like, we're reimagining things. Well, I would have liked to have heard about it earlier, so I know all the details of why we're reimagining things prior to getting to the budgetary part of it.
Well, I think, Malin, you had written in an email, and I agree with it. Part of it is that there's multiple things that were proposed to change in this year's budget. So instead of saying our students are down in Middlesex, so we can, through attrition, increase the number of courses being taught, and that's done. Well, that's done at the same time that we're adding APs, when we're taking away world language, and unfortunately, I believe when you're making changes like this, you need to tell a story.
Yeah.
And maybe I tell too many stories in the RTM, but the fact of the matter is that it's not presented like a story, and there were too many changes going on at once.
Well, it's
And
like,
I think,
the exact opposite was what John did with the first selectman budget. With the Board of Selectmen budget, when he said, to really cut anything in this budget, you have to start thinking that you want to reduce services, or what the town is spending money on, we shouldn't be spending money on. There's not much left to just, save a little bit here and there. I thought that was missing from the Board of Ed side. It would have been much cleaner this year to say, we didn't, we have a list of things that we need to talk about because we can't continue to provide these services in this manner, like whatever it is, right? We have to reimagine.
That's because on the Board of Selectmen budget, they didn't tack and change direction.
Right,
And the
right.
past few years
Right.
that I've been on the RTM, every year there's been sort of a surprise change in tack on the Board of Ed. They're they're trying something new, or they're trying,
No.
and
It
that's
That's
why
budget
I agree
time.
with you. The Board of Selectmen budget, I can follow it. I follow the
Right.
bouncing ball. I
Right.
have not been able to follow the bouncing ball on the Board of Ed. And therefore, and because I'm not an educator and I'm not in the
Right.
day-to-day weeds, I don't know why. And maybe if I was on those committees, maybe I'd be asking these questions as we go along. But I think the Board of Ed gets surprised themselves. So you're right. It's maybe they need quarterly.
100%.
I still have to
100% they were
mention though,
surprised.
even with their surprise, I still have to mention that the superintendent presented really a 1.19, not counting the add back of the 150, which drove it up a little bit. And the current budget is 6.48 with a potential $400,000 cut in transportation. So, this budget went the wrong direction. And that's what, and hearing somebody said we're not responsible for financial parts of it was just, the actual term is I was gobsmacked hearing that.
Jack, this budget went in the wrong direction because there was no cogent presentation and explanation of what the initiatives were. And so you had people that are trying their best to make sure that what they felt like was their core service. And I presume you're talking about the teachers, because that was where the most of the money went back in. It was not going to hurt our students. And maybe that was a mistake, but I've been an efficiency consultant, and that stuff is crazy. And
No,
they asked
understand.
a bunch of questions, none of which were answered on how is this going to happen. So I mean, I think again, had you had more discussion during the year about these things, then I think it's okay to say shame on them for putting more money in. But I just don't think they had time, and their questions weren't answered properly. Mine weren't, and I watched all of those meetings.
Well, I'm not disagreeing, and I have a lot of respect for the members on the Board of Ed and a lot of respect for a lot of the questions that were asked. We made a comment, Beth spoke for our team saying, you can't do business as usual, but also that this was the third year in a row that you're introducing something in. Anyway, I want to wrap this up. And so there's two things I want to say. On the meeting at the 18th, I'll be calling either Bill or Jenny. I'm going to need one of the two of you to present the special appropriation on the 26.5 and the lease at 20 Great Island. I will be in the building, but I am a treasurer of an association whose two properties went up by 50%. And I won't even tell you what I actually think about that. And so that it just so happens the 18th is the day that I'm scheduled to meet with the assessors to discuss those two properties. So if the RTM takes some time, I'll be back for the buses. If not, Beth, you got the buses.
Okay.
Figured. I will write it up. So who's ever there can get up there and say, I am not Jack Davis. And you might get an applause from that. Do we want to do minutes quickly and then we can call it a night?
We're here, we
Sure.
should do.
Okay.
Sure. Everyone, I'm assuming everyone got a copy of the minutes from, it was February 11th, I think it was.
It was Rob.
Yeah. So it was an easy one. If there they have a if there aren't any comments or questions or typos to fix, can I have a motion to approve the minutes from, hang on, I'll tell you, it was make it
I have
official.
Malin first. I have Louisa seconding.
Okay. All in favor? And we're only 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Okay.
Yep.
No opposed. Okay, no. That's great.
So I'll now take a motion to adjourn. Oh boy, every hand went up there. I'll take Holly first and Beth second. All in favor. Thank you all. Have a pleasant evening. Reach out to your Board of Finance counterparts so we can get this thing going.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you.